Brianna, thank you so much. Hi there, I'm Brooke Baldwin. You're watching CNN. Thank you for being with me. Just in the last 24 hours, the president of the United States snubs an ally because, well, they won't sell Greenland. He praises an adversary, calling for Russia to return to the G8. He endorses a tweet calling himself the King of Israel and the second coming of God after enraging Jewish leaders with a trope about loyalty. He blames the media and the Fed for trying to create a recession despite all of the warnings, and all the while admitting he is concerned enough to consider another tax cut. He then makes a move to keep migrant families and kids detained for even longer while refusing to give them flu shots. And just 2 weeks after the massacres in El Paso and Dayton, where 31 people died, he has one phone call with the NRA, and he backs off, quote unquote, meaningful background checks. Atlantic Magazine reporting that he told the NRA they were off the table. But as he left the White House today, the president could not send a clear message on this incredibly urgent issue.
Oh, I have an appetite for background checks. We're going to be doing background checks. We're working with Democrats. We're working with Republicans. We already have very strong background checks, but we're going to be filling in some of the loopholes, as we call them. We're dealing with Democrats. We're dealing with Republicans. We're dealing with the NRA. We're dealing with gun owners. We're dealing with everybody. And I think we're going to have something, hopefully, that's meaningful.
Sarah Westwood is in Louisville, Kentucky, where the president will soon address a veterans convention there. So, Sarah, just on this issue of guns, are we any closer in understanding what's actually being discussed on gun reform at the White House?
Well, Brooke, we're seeing all sorts of signals out of the White House. As you just heard, we heard President Trump earlier today denying that he's abandoned his push for expanded background checks. But sources do tell CNN that behind the scenes, President Trump has started to cool to the idea, which he voiced frequent support for in the immediate aftermath of those two mass shootings earlier this year. But that shift, sources tell CNN, came after a sustained effort from the NRA, from conservative lawmakers, from aides and allies, to try to get the president to change his mind about supporting expanded background checks. Now, of course, he's being told by his aides that this is a policy, if he supported it, that could score him few political points, but that could actually hurt him with his own supporters. And we sort of heard him express that sentiment to reporters as he was leaving the White House to come here to Kentucky. He said that he was concerned Democrats would not be satisfied no matter what policy he supported. Take a listen.
I'm concerned that no matter what we agree to, when we get there, I'm concerned the Democrats will say, oh, well, we now want this and we want, and it's a slippery slope. And that's what actually your gun owners and a lot of other people are concerned with. But assuming that that's not going to take place by the Democrats, assuming they really want to get this done, we can get it done.
Now, despite all these signals that President Trump has been backing off his push for expanding background checks, the White House has been denying that this idea is off the table. But keep in mind that in February, the White House did issue a veto threat to background check legislation that was passed by House Democrats. But the view among Trump allies right now, Brooke, seems to be that red flag laws, which already exist in some states, is the more doable option in the short term. And that, Brooke, is something that President Trump, at least for the moment, still appears to support.
All right, Sarah, thank you very much. President Trump letting loose on the White House lawn in a head-spinning press conference. He backtracked on a payroll tax cut. Just 24 hours after saying he was considering them, he doubled down on insulting Jewish people, saying only weak people would disagree with his belief that voting for Democrats makes them disloyal to Israel. And speaking of tropes, he's resurrected the nasty woman title, this time applied it to the Prime Minister of Denmark. And this, the day after the NRA apparently pushed him to scrap a plan for background checks. Discussion about that is on again, although no actual policy was mentioned.
We can close up the gaps. We can do things that are very good and things that, frankly, gun owners want to have done. But we also have to remember the gun doesn't pull the trigger, a person does, and we have great mental illness.
No specifics, though. Joining me now, CNN contributor Michael D'Antonio, author of The Truth About Trump. And Michael, that was just a sliver of all the president went through today. I mean, it was a lot, even for this president. What do you think is really going on?
Well, I think he's very concerned about the 2020 election. he has concepts like weakness and strength in his mind at all times. And when he backed away from background checks and it appeared that the NRA was pushing him around, many people observed the president's own weakness. And so today he's going to use that term, but he's going to throw it at somebody else. The same is true when he uses words like nasty to talk about other people. It's really something that he knows is true about himself. And even this whole thing about we have tremendous mental illness. Well, I think we see mental illness displayed in the Oval Office, on the White House lawn, on a regular basis. So he's hinting at things that are real and that are serious, but he's sort of flipping them and putting them on other people.
He also, on the same day, he doubles down on his dual loyalty claim. He retweets a tweet where he's saying, I am the king of Israel, and then refers to himself there on the lawn saying, I am the chosen one in terms of taking on China. And listen, we know that this man has a healthy ego, but this feels different.
Well, it is different. And, you could also say he has a very unhealthy ego, that it's wounded in some way that requires him to constantly build himself up. He is aware that evangelical Americans, especially conservative evangelicals who support him, are fixated on Israel. They used to actually be very anti-Israel. They used to be very critical of Israel in all respects. Now they identify with Israel and they think of themselves as almost the fulfillment of God's plan and that Israel is essential to it. So he's throwing out these notions, that I am chosen, well, the Jews are considered the chosen people. And when he talks about being the king or someone else talks about him being the second coming, well, that sort of mixes up terms that have nothing to do with Judaism, but it's a reference to religion, and he wants to play with that now.
There was one more clip I want to play. This is a claim or a threat that he would let ISIS prisoners into France and Germany. Here he was.
We're holding thousands of ISIS fighters right now, and Europe has to take them. And if Europe doesn't take them, I'll have no choice but to release them into the countries from which they came, which is Germany and France and other places.
I mean, Michael, I can't climb into his head. I don't know if he's kidding. This is the President of the United States. And that is releasing ISIS prisoners into France and Germany and other countries. That is not even close to being funny.
No, it's not close to being funny. And I think since he is the President of the United States, we should all take him seriously pretty much at all times. He's not a guy who can tell a joke. So I wouldn't assume that he's ever joking. He'll mock people, he'll make fun of others, but he's not a guy who tells jokes. So this I would take very seriously as a clue to how his mind works. There is nothing more depraved than the notion of releasing would-be terrorists onto the streets of our allies. And yet this is what he's going to propose. I don't know where this derangement is headed, but it's very disturbing to watch. And I think it's most instructive when it comes to the president's own temperament and personality and his fitness for office.
You said it, Michael D'Antonio. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke.
White supremacy in our school.